Happy New Year, y'all. We are back with another edition of the DNVR Draft Podcast. I'm Justin Michael. We've got Jake Schwanitz. We're remote, obviously not live from the Toyota Lounge. We've been going nonstop since the beginning of football season, trying to see some family while we can. Happy New Year's out there to all of the supporters in DNVR Nation. We love you guys so much. First things first, man. How you doing? Have you got any sleep since the end of the season?
I actually have. That's one thing I have been able to do is catch up on sleep and hang out with the fam and just enjoy some bowl games. Enjoy the new 12-team CFP, some ups and some downs. Big Broncos game on Sunday. I'm doing all right, brother. How are you?
I'm doing good. The football is certainly picking up. We've got the 12-team playoff, which we're going to be talking about pretty in depth today. We're going to give out some prospects that we'd like the Broncos to target based on these playoff teams. We'll give some thoughts on the format, all of that fun stuff. Look ahead. Real quick, before we get into everything, just wanted to say my thoughts and prayers go out to New Orleans. Obviously, just a really horrific situation. The Sugar Bowl ends up getting delayed, rightfully so. But just wanted to say that I'm thinking about everybody that's impacted, everybody that knows anybody out there. Just a really horrible situation. Obviously, certainly a lot bigger than sports. We focus on a lot of fun stuff on here. We make a lot of silly debates, but when stuff like this happens, it's a pretty stark reminder that there are things out there bigger than football. That said, I guess let's just jump right into it. There's no good way to segue from something like that, but the second round of college football playoff, I would say, has been more competitive than the first round was. There were inevitably going to be some blowouts. There were blowouts in the 4-team format, so to expect none in the 12-team would have been oblivious and ignorant, in my opinion. That said, I do think that the most important thing here is inclusion. I think stories like Boise State, like Arizona State, have been good for the sport as a whole, and it's been fun to just see some teams have an opportunity that we haven't really had a chance to talk about. Like you and I have been talking about the college football playoff together for a half decade. We could write a book on Georgia. We've talked so much about Bama and Ohio State and Michigan and Clemson. It's fun to be able to talk about Arizona State and Cam Scattaboo.
100%. I mean, this is the reason why I think we were so, at least I was excited that we went to the 12-team format, at least give these teams a shot because we've seen in other bowl games, throughout forever, really. I mean, anyone can lose in any day. Type of thing in college football. And, there are a lot of teams who are, for lack of a better term, overpowered, I guess, and can seem to run through a lot of teams. But, when you have a team like Texas who has a quarterback issue, I think that we've talked about quite a lot this season, with Quinn Ewers, his lack of consistency, always up and down. Do you go to Arch and then you face a team like, ASU who has a young quarterback who's able to run around, and Cam Scatterwood was really the engine of that team. Styles make fights, and that's what we got in the Fiesta Bowl, at least. So, the whole outrage over the first round blowouts to me was just crazy because we see this all the time. And the Nuggets put it to the Lakers in what was that, the first round last year in the playoffs. No one was complaining about that series being a blowout, even though that had nothing to do with the two teams in the finals. So it's just silly. People get up in arms over college football. It's why we love it, but it can get a bit annoying at times.
You can set up a format, but you don't get to cherry pick the results. Like, this is sports. It's a part of competition, especially at the collegiate level. Teams look drastically different from week to week. You've got 19-year-olds playing out there who, are going through a million things that have nothing to do with football, but certainly impact how competitive a team might be on any given day. There's just so many factors that go into that. Seems silly to fixate on it. I will say I do think there is some validity just from a general reaction standpoint to the format as a whole,
Hmm.
that they've got to change the seating. I do think I think the top four, conference champions, however that may be, they deserve a spot to get in. I think we saw some wonkiness from the seating that, if you're Oregon, I think it's kind of a frustrating path of like, oh, sweet, we draw Ohio State, who we already beat in the
Yeah.
regular season. I think there's maybe some argument to you would have been better off playing that first weekend. Obviously, you would have had to win an extra game, but I think, if you could play like Indiana and Penn State or something like that, it would just been a much different conversation. Were you surprised that Ohio State waxed Oregon the way that they did, and this game was essentially over 10 minutes in?
I'm not gonna lie, I really was. We've talked about Oregon a lot too, right? Like they are undefeated, they are the number one team in the country, kind of de facto because of that. But it's not like an Oregon team, with Marcus Mariota, where they are just loaded at every position. They have got DeAnthony Thomas and all these guys running around. They do have players, but I was just shocked to see, Will Howard has really impressed me over these last two playoff games. Maybe not the most efficient outings, especially last night, but 17-26 for 319 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's something I just didn't think he would be able to do in the college football playoffs. So hats off to him. I thought Dylan Gabriel actually played well considering the circumstances, and I think we might have been too low on him just collectively. Just recapping, what he's done in the Big 12 title game, what he did in this game. He's had some good performances along throughout the year, though, but it was a bit shocking because I really thought that Michigan kind of ended Ohio State's season, but they've really proved me wrong, and they've really rebounded from that nicely.
There's a million different ways you could take this, and we'll just kind of bounce around. We'll give a couple of thoughts on all these programs, all the games, all the matchups. What are your thoughts in terms of where Oregon is at in that conversation of like the true heavyweight contenders? Because for a couple of years, like we mentioned just a second ago, you had the Clemsons, Bamas, Georgias, Ohio State's, a couple other schools you can throw in. There's about 4 to 7 or 8 schools that have realistically had an opportunity to win a national championship over the last decade or so. It seemed like Oregon has always been in the mix. They've obviously made a couple of playoffs. They've made some runs. They're always in that conversation. But to me, it's felt like they were in that next tier. Like if we were ranking tiers, like it's like these are the contenders. These are teams that are really dang good and maybe under the right circumstances could do it. And you thought like under Dan Lanning that they had maybe worked their way into that upper tier, into the conversation with the Georgias of the world, with the Ohio States and Bama's. I know Bama's not in the playoff this year, but just the traditional brands. Yeah. Where are they at? Are they in that second tier? Are they in that first tier? I mean, after losing to Washington twice last year and then going out the way that they did this year, it still feels like there's a next level they have to kind of get over before they're in that true elite status for me.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like you said, it's kind of an interesting like dichotomy. Like, are you like the elite tier? Or are you right below it? Because, you go through the whole regular season. And as I said, like, I don't think anyone really saw this team as a juggernaut, coming into the CFP, 12-0, 13-0 Oregon, like, got to watch out for them. Whoever draws them is walking into a buzzsaw when it was, in fact, the other way around, them walking into Ohio State. I don't know. I mean, they ran the ball 28 times for minus 23 yards. I think just looking at the box score and just going off of what I remember last night, I do think that there is a certain level in the trenches that they've got to get to in order to reach that mark. I also wonder if the transfer quarterback thing is kind of holding them back because you're not really getting you're kind of getting tapped or capped potential with some of these guys, right? Including Bo Nix. Like we knew who Bo Nix was. He's had great seasons, but he couldn't beat Michael Penix those 2 games last year. Dylan Gabriel, we kind of know what he is, right? Comes in, plays some fine football, and they've got great receivers, but I don't think it's just that extra, that oomph to get you into that elite tier, that we've seen from some of these guys. I mean, Georgia, even their quarterbacks, Stetson Bennett put the team on his back. Is there a Jalen Hurts or a Tua Tagovailoa walking through the door for Oregon? Someone who can, really run the table. I think that's the biggest separation. I don't know if you have any different thoughts there, though.
No, I'm with you. I think one of my biggest takeaways from this playoff as a whole, whether it be Oregon, whether it be this entire field, I don't think there is that guy, that quarterback that single-handedly takes over and leads his team to a championship, which it makes this really interesting because you've got a lot of guys that are good, that have had nice moments. Will Howard, for instance, playing probably the best ball of his career. And if he's able to do that with the talent that they have around him, that makes Ohio State pretty dang frisky. And we'll get into that at the end, like who we think is the most dangerous at this stage of things. But yeah, I just think there's levels to like what they're able to accomplish with their current plan for a quarterback. I do wonder, do they hit the transfer market again? Could Quinn Ewers be the Oregon starting quarterback? That's the rumors.
100%, yeah.
Right now, the rage is that Ewers might be commanding $5 million plus in the portal. Someone will give it to him if he wants to come back and play college football, whether it be Oregon, whether it be Notre Dame or whoever. I don't think it's going to be at Texas. I assume we're going to be witnessing the beginning of the Arch Manning era here pretty shortly, especially based on what we've seen so far out of Ewers. Like he is kind of what we have always thought he is. You know, he's got a nice arm. He makes some plays. Still kind of desiring a little bit more when it comes to those big time throws with consistency.
Absolutely. I mean, we can go into Ewers now too. I mean, overall, I think a solid game.
Yeah, he was good.
But he damn near threw the game away. That pick late in the fourth quarter was around like the 5-6 minute mark.
I mean, if you run the ball, you just run the ball and the game's over.
I mean, exactly. So, I mean, there were just a lot of plays where he does throw a nice ball and he can get it to the sidelines. He can throw it all over the yard if he wants to. It's the lack of consistency. That was a terrible interception that really almost cost them the game. I think it's just kind of sums up what we've seen from him in his time at Texas. It's a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and it's not game to game. It's like down to down, like throw to throw consistency with him, which gives me just that slight bit of hesitation. I think he enters the portal, and I think, as you just said, it's a team like Oregon. I don't know, Florida State, maybe even Ohio State. I mean, that would be weird for him to go back there, but like. That's where we're talking. Like he's going to be like the Dylan Gabriel of last cycle, where he's going to be the most coveted quarterback in the portal, and he can kind of go wherever he wants and command whatever he wants.
It's interesting just to see how this whole market process plays out, because as you already mentioned, the guys right now that are the most valuable in the portal have perceived ceilings. Like Cam Ward was a guy with a lot of talent who was perceived to be flawed. Now by coming back, he might have actually played his way
for sure
into like the top 10 this year, which I don't think he had any chance of doing, coming out of Washington State. So it all worked out for him, but it is just funny to see how this has all played out. It's worked out pretty well for some of these guys. But I do think that it also puts a limit just on what you're going to be able to accomplish as a team if you are not able to ever sign and develop a quarterback. Like at some point, especially when it's a year-to-year thing and you're trying to plug and play these guys, it's just tough to have a hit rate that's that high when you're going with that process.
Definitely, and it's obviously a lot more prevalent and just more common now. I mean, Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, these teams all have transfer quarterbacks and they're in the quarterfinals of the CFP. So it's just getting over I mean, I do think we'll get to Penn State, I'm sure, but Drew Allar, I think we've kind of slept on him a bit in terms of what he can do. I think it's a little bit of that consistency with him as well that he needs to improve on. But what he was doing, the last two games in the CFP have really opened my eyes. And there's a lot of room to grow with him, I think.
His flashes are high. I mean, you look at that touchdown he threw early on in the game against Boise State, the touch that he's able to put on that football. He throws a pretty ball. It's just that lack of consistency. I think there's a lot of flash with all these teams, but there hasn't been like a true dominant juggernaut the entire season. And that's what made this whole outlook pretty interesting coming into this year, is you did feel like half of these teams realistically could probably compete for a national championship. I mean, even a couple of teams that ended up getting blown out, like Tennessee, I was never really that in on them, but I thought they would show more than that. Same with Indiana. That's why I think it's silly too, going back to what we started with some of these people trying to cherry pick and be like, see, ASU couldn't win that game, so they shouldn't have been in, or like Boise State. they were a hell of a lot more competitive than Oregon or Indiana or Tennessee was. So you tell me.
That's facts. And I think you're right with it's got to be something with the seeding. I think that just kind of thinking about it over the weekend and spitballing it here, give the Power Four conference winners and the top G5 team, just give them an AQ and then still seed from there, I think. And then I think you'd get a much more even bracket. I mean, but part of me still thinks that I think that winning a conference needs to kind of mean something
It should
like
matter
that.
for something.
Absolutely. So I don't know.
It's always going to be imperfect, especially when you let this many teams in, because the reality is there are not 12 teams that are national championship level. Now you might get some Cinderella type team who like objectively was, not perceived to be on par with certain teams. They do something crazy. Like we see, as you mentioned, we see weird stuff in college sports all the time, but most years there's going to be those, 2 or 3 teams. And whether you have 12 teams, 15 teams, or 4 teams, those top 2, 3 teams are still going to be, clear cut above everybody else.
Exactly. So I don't know. I mean, this was all a lot of, kind of testing and figuring out for the future this year, right? So I do think that there will be some changes that come to at least the seeding and the making of the bracket. But it's a 12-team playoff. I just don't know how much more different you're going to get, when it's just 12 teams each time.
At least we have multiple bowls that matter now. Like the New Year's Six all matter again. I mean, 2 years ago, a lot of these guys are not playing in the Fiesta Bowl. They're not playing in the Cotton Bowl or whatever because there was no real stakes for them. It didn't matter.
Well, last year, the game Florida State against Georgia, I can't remember which game it was.
It wasn't even watchable.
Yeah, Florida State laid down before they even entered the bowl game.
Yeah, it's going to need some tinkering, but I think overall it's been entertaining. It's been fun. I'm interested to see where it goes from here. Can Notre Dame give Georgia a game just briefly? They've been hot. I mean, this is a different level, like we said, in the trenches and stuff, but I've been impressed with them.
Yeah, I actually do think that Notre Dame has kind of the dogs, at least, defensively in the front seven and in the trenches with their running game to give Georgia some problems. And I think Riley Leonard's obviously going to be the X factor here, particularly what he does with his legs. I think, you saw a big difference in that game against Indiana a few weekends ago with him running around and just extending plays, making plays, running for first downs. If he can do that tonight at a, sufficient level and just keep the chains moving, I do think that Notre Dame can push Georgia.
That has been a thing Georgia at times kind of struggled with too. Like Bama, when they were moving the ball on them in that game, Milrose able to escape the pocket a little bit, extend the play. I mean, Riley Leonard can run really well, and I don't think he's Jalen Milroe athletic, but I do think him being able to extend the play, get the ball to some of those guys on the perimeter, it's going to be a big deal for them. I'm just curious to see what type of ground game either team is able to get going, because these are stout defensive lines that you're going up against on both sides. And I just think whatever team's able to run the ball with any type of consistency is probably the team that pulls this one out.
I mean, in the backup quarterback factor with Georgia, they're going to have to rely on Trevor Etienne in that ground game. They're going to have to get creative. And that's something we haven't really seen from Georgia, since they lost Todd Monken. This is something Dre always likes to bring up, how losing Todd Monken at OC for Georgia was a massive loss. They lost a lot of their creativity. They were able to kind of hide some of those quarterbacks that they had who were quote unquote game managers in previous years. And now you're going to really have a guy going into a situation with a backup quarterback. You need some of that. So if they can come out with some of that and show some offensive variety despite having the backup quarterback, I do think that Georgia can, do what Georgia does and, maybe not roll Notre Dame, but at least come away with the win. But I think Notre Dame's definitely up for the task. They're actually favored in this game, I think, by 1.5. So
the quarterback situation's a big deal. I mean, it's a huge factor in this type of matchup. I'm excited. I'm excited to see how it plays out. We're going to get into some of our top 5 targets. We've got some folks throwing out names in the Toyota chat, which I love. We are certainly going to hit on some of these guys. We're going to focus primarily on players that played in this 12-team playoff. But if we got questions here about Caleb Johnson, you want to throw out some other names, certainly can, and we'll give you some thoughts on each of these draft prospects. I'm going to take a quick break real quick, shout out some of the presenting partners making all of this possible. Starting with the homies over at Coors Light, they encourage you to choose a chill mindset. When you're juggling work, life, family, all kinds of stuff, it can get stressful, it can get chaotic. During those times, you want to make sure you choose a chill mindset. You got to do the little things, whether it's taking your deep breaths, going for a walk, getting exercise, eating right, all of those things. Put yourself in a chill state of mind. Then when you're kicked back, when you're relaxing, when you got the college football playoff on, crack open that ice cold Coors Light, cold and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Choose chill this winter, then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or you can get it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
Shout out to the homies over at Bet365, my favorite betting app out there, with their early moneyline payouts for NFL and CFB. If your team gets up by 17 points or more and you take them on the money line, you win. Even if the other team comes all the way back and actually wins the football game, with the early moneyline payout at Bet365, you're able to create all these moneyline parlays, and they truly aren't over until that 17 point is hit. So it allows you to be a little bit more risky, especially with those big underdogs. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when you place a $5 bet. As soon as that bet is decided, whether it wins or misses, you'll get $150 in bonus bets directly into your account. Use the code DNVR365 when you sign up. Just deposit $10, place a bet of $5 or more, get $150 in bonus bets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary. Bet365. You must be 21 or older, physically located in Colorado. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER.
You heard the man. Shout out Bet365. Shout out to Coors Light, making all of this possible. Shout out to all you guys in the Toyota chat rocking with us this morning. Certainly appreciate the support. We're going to get into some of our top targets for the Broncos in the upcoming draft. Out of this college football playoff, we've already seen a couple of names floated in the chat that I have on my list. But before we get into that, just real briefly, do you have any final thoughts on the second round of the CFP, Jake?
I mean, we didn't really touch too much on Penn State, but again, I just want to say how impressed I was with them. I mean, the way they handled Ashton Genty without Abdul Carter, particularly their best defensive player, was impressive. I mean, it's really shown that they have a front that I think can contend with anyone in this 12-team playoff. And, you know, I think you said we'll get to this later in the show, but to me, they seem like, you know, a real dark horse to take this whole thing home and win the entire bracket. What I've seen from Drew Allar and Tyler Warren, who I'm sure we're going to get into here very, very soon. They've got the pieces to make some noise, and the running back Singleton made a lot of noise yesterday, 2 days ago as well.
Are they going to have Carter back for the next round?
I don't know. I can look that up real quick and see if we have an injury update.
I do think that's a big factor in terms of what their ceiling ultimately is. Like, you know, you get a rematch against Ohio State or something like that, you're going to need to be able to generate that pressure off of the edge. But I'm with you. I've been impressed by Penn State. They've always been in, you know, we mentioned Oregon and trying to break through into that next tier. I would put Penn State in that exact same category. Feels like year after year, they're a top 10 team. They're in the mix. But there's always just kind of been a level between them and Ohio State and those types of programs. We'll see. We'll definitely see being able to contain a guy like Genty, who's had success against literally everybody in the country this year, including Oregon. 151 missed tackles. I believe Genty had more yards after contact than the second leading rusher in the country. So just like what he has been able to do this year has been obscene. And I think that's a good place to start it as far as Broncos draft targets go, because I do think that running back is a position where Denver could use a bit of a boost. I know we've seen some moments. McLaughlin's had his moments, like Estime. You like his potential, but Javonte, a guy that you and I were as high on as anybody coming out of North Carolina, like he is a draft pod staple. We've been talking about him for over 5 years. I'm just not sure he's ever going to be the same guy after those knee injuries. And we feared that was going to be a possibility, but the burst isn't there. The ability to create yards after contact is just not the same. And to me, if you could bring in a guy like Ashton Genty, I'm not sure where he ultimately ends up. I think he could potentially go as high as like top 10, certainly top 20. I would love to see Genty in a Sean Payton offense. I think he would give Denver exactly what they need between the tackles. And I think he's a little bit underrated as a pass catcher too, and kind of gives you something there. Where are you at with these running backs, and how high are you on him versus like Cam Scatterbo, who is as fun as anybody to watch in the country? I'm not sure what Cam Scatterbo does effectively at the collegiate level, running through all these guys, is going to translate in the same way that GNT's game will.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get Ashton Genty. I just think the Broncos have already played themselves out of his range at this point, barring a massive trade up into the top 10, top 15 range. I think the Genty dream is dead, unfortunately. He's a great player, though. I'm really excited to see where he goes. And hopefully it's not in the AFC West, but we'll find out. Let's just keep going with the running backs. I mean, you mentioned Cam Scatterbo. I love him. He's one of my favorite players in all of college football, and I do think he has a legitimate claim as the best back in CFP this year. It's the all around ability for me, though. I mean, as you mentioned, he breaks tackles. It's the contact balance and the toughness really that stand out. But it's kind of like their Travis Hunter. He's their jack of all trades. I mean, he's throwing the damn ball yesterday for a touchdown. He's out there catching the ball downfield on 9 routes. And he looks natural while doing it. So I think he's someone that Sean Payton could have a lot of fun with. I'd love to see him in Colorado. I think he would fit the offense greatly. And he would kind of give you some of that, what you're missing from Javonte right now, right? Because that was Javonte's calling card, just his contact balance, ability to finish.
Had so much more burst, though. Like, as much as I love Scatterbo, I don't know if you're going to run away from defenders the way he can in the Big 12.
And that's fair. I think that, Javonte was he was one of my favorite running back prospects we've covered on this show over the last however many years we've done it. Scatterbo, I would like. I mean, any of the Ohio State guys. Give me Judkins or Travion Henderson. Travion Henderson has looked really nice recently. That big playability is starting to finally come back after that injury he had 2-3 years ago. Penn State, Singleton. I mean, that guy was running all over the place. So there's multiple running backs in this CFP who I think the Broncos should keep a close eye on.
I think that's what's exciting too about, you mentioned probably have played their way out of the Ashton Genty range realistically without a trade up as of now. You might be able to land one of these guys in the 3rd round that's, really going to be playing some important football at this stage. And they've got, I mean, I love the Ohio State kids. Penn State, as you mentioned, on a day everybody's focused on Genty, it was Penn State's rushing attack that really stood out. Granted, if you're going to point that out, it also should be pointed out that Genty's going against 10-man boxes essentially every single snap.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that Scatterbo's versatility does kind of play into that Sean Payton mindset of, he's a guy that we might line him up at H-back. We might do some end arounds where he's like lined up as a tight end, and then maybe he throws the ball out of that. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff you could do with him. He's certainly a beast. Again, a guy that you might be able to get, say, the 4th round versus trading up, in the 1st round for a guy like Genty, and he had some versatility at a nice value for you there. But I do think there are some really nice options here as far as running backs go and who you could target in the draft.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great running back class. It's something that I think I've noticed really all year. I mean, someone in the comments brought up Caleb Johnson earlier.
That's what I wanted to come back to. Is he your running back 2 right now?
Man, he is a force. You want to talk about breaking tackles and contact balance. I mean, that's what he does well too. Massive back. And I do think Sean Payton, just historically, you look at the guys that he's had, he kind of brings in those bigger backs. I don't think a lot of them have worked out, but I'd be down for Caleb Johnson. I love Omari and Hampton too, what he's done at North Carolina, his kind of all-around game. And then, we've mentioned a lot of these guys, Judkins, Henderson, Nick Singleton already. It's a great running back group, and I'd love to come away with at least one of them.
I think tight end is obviously a position that's easy to fixate on. Tyler Warren is a stud. I mean, there's a couple of interesting options. Harold, what's the kid out
Harold
of
Fannin?
Green? Yeah, yep. Fannin. I mean, there are some intriguing athletes. Warren, though, he's just a beast, man. And again, like going back to that Swiss Army knife role that we've seen, like the Taysom Hill types fill. I would think that Sean Payton would be very intrigued with Penn State's Tyler Warren. How high do you see him going as of now, though?
I think that's the thing. I think Kyle Pitts has taught a lot of teams a lesson recently. there is a lot of risk with these tight ends, especially when you take them in the first round or high in the first round, because you put that pressure on them to produce right away. And as we've seen, it can take a lot of them, like some time to really adapt to the NFL game. Brock Bowers has come in and done his thing, though. So there are certain guys out there. With Tyler Warren, though, I think, it is that versatility that we're talking about. That's really his calling card. And I think with that, and just, he can run the ball too if you wanted him to. So I think with that, he will be a first rounder. We talked a lot about Colston Loveland this year too. And I know he didn't have a great year because of Michigan's quarterback situation and all that. I still think he's someone who can kind of loom around that first round range and potentially be drafted pretty high. Gunnar Helm for Texas. The Texas tight end had a great game yesterday. He's a
He
massive
moves
body
well,
too.
man.
Yeah, he was really impressive to me. He's a Colorado kid as well, but 6'5", 250 pounds. There's some options at positions in need for the Broncos for sure.
If I had to put a knife to your back and said Denver adds one of these premier tight ends or premier running backs, where would you rather see the Broncos go?
That's a great question. Because I do think you need to give Bo some weapons, particularly in the passing game, so that we can, get a little bit more explosiveness out of this passing game and more downfield ability. That being said, though, I think the value of getting a really good running back to give you some just down-to-down security. The running game hasn't been great this year in Denver. They've needed help. They haven't really had a guy. They've been searching for options. Jaleel has really come along lately, but I do think that out of everything that you need, a running back would really change a lot for this team moving forward and kind of be that security blanket for Bo. I look at guys like Omarion Hampton, Ashton Genty, of course, if they were in range, but Omarion Hampton and Cam Scadaboo, just that outlet out of the backfield, I think is something that is truly missing. And Sean Payton is great in the screen game. I don't think that we've really seen that a lot yet.
We haven't had the guy for it, but I mean, you look back
Exactly.
at what they did with Sproles, all those. I mean, they would have 4 or 5 scat backs every year. It felt like that made an impact.
100%. What he did with Reggie Bush, what he did with Pierre Thomas. He's got a great history of getting those guys working in the passing game, particularly the screen game. So give me a good back. Let's get that going a bit. And I think that fixes a lot of problems that the Broncos have.
I'm with you. I think the running back is more immediately pressing. I will say it's been frustrating that Denver is basically going on a decade without a quality tight end or at least any type of consistency there. I mean, you got to go back to like Owen Daniels. That's probably the last legitimate Broncos tight end as far as consistency within the pass catching game, also being an impact blocker, like giving you everything you needed. It's just one of those that's kind of a luxury, like the best teams have them. I do think it's whether you look at the Packers, the Chiefs, the Lions, like all these top offenses, I do think it is something they need to prioritize. But I think that running back is probably the more immediate pressing issue. And you just got to find some stability in that aspect for your young quarterback, because the more you ask him to be Superman, the tougher spot you're putting him in, because as good as he has been, and Bo Nix has been better than either of us thought he would be coming out, like he still has some physical limitations. Like he's already made throws that I didn't think he could make, but he's not Herbert. He's not Mahomes. Like you got to put the right cast around him. And you mentioned, adding more weapons. Let me ask you this. Would you consider reuniting Tez Johnson with Bo Nix?
Oh, absolutely. I do think, that's one thing I think that stood out to me about Oregon. One, Dylan Gabriel, I thought played better than a lot of people were initially giving him credit for yesterday. But these wide receivers, man, that they have, Evan Stewart hardly played. He had that pregame injury, and they still didn't really miss a beat on the perimeter, and they were making plays when given the opportunity, when Ohio State wasn't completely collapsing the pocket around Dylan Gabriel. So I'd love to. I think that'd be a great fit. We'll see how high he goes, but I think he's someone who could really, turn heads in the next step of the process too, throughout the pre-draft, Senior Bowl type all-star games and combine.
Do you worry that he's too undersized? I mean, he looks like he weighs about 165 pounds soaking wet.
They already drafted Troy Franklin, and they've got Marvin Mims.
I know.
They don't really have big receivers.
At some point, you need a little bit of size.
Yeah, they do have Vele and Sutton right now, so we'll see. I think we're going to learn a lot because coming into this season, you looked at the wide receiving core, and I think a lot of us wanted to see them make a move, maybe even go get someone in the draft. They didn't do that. I mean, they did go get Troy Franklin, a speedster. I do want to see, what Sean Payton wants to do with this receiving core moving forward, whether he stacks up the big bodies, whether it's speed, because I do think they need quite a few things at the wide receiver core. You're just not going to be able to fill all those needs this offseason.
The ascension of Marvin Mims the last month has been encouraging. It makes it feel a little less pressing.
It's my guy. Yeah. Watching what he's been doing with him just in the creativity. And this is why it's so exciting to talk about like Tyler Warren, because you look at what Sean's doing with Marvin Mims already. And if he
get a good athlete where you can,
exactly.
We'll design it for him. Who gives a shit what his position is? I don't, put him in the backfield. We'll direct snap it to him if we have to. But I'm intrigued. I think there's some options. We're going to keep this going. I love the enthusiasm in the Toyota chat. Keep throwing out names. We'll keep talking with you. We are real quick going to shout out a couple more partners, starting with Toyota. Toyota, big parts of the Colorado footprint. They make vehicles that are perfect for exploring the state. Whether you're on the western slope, checking out, Gunnison, stuff like that. Maybe you're cruising around Cap Hill. It does not matter. Toyota has something for you. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering the off-road trails or hauling the way to the world, again, they've got something. 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce that carbon footprint. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Visit your Front Range Toyota stores at a location near you. AutoNation Toyota, Arapahoe and Centennial, Corwin Toyota in Boulder, Groove Toyota in Littleton, Mountain States Toyota in Denver, Stevenson Toyota East in Aurora, and Stevenson Toyota West in Lakewood. Toyota is the official vehicle of DNVR. Let's go places.
And also shout out to us and our all-star events team. Shout out to what Spence has been doing there. A lot of cool stuff coming to you guys from our Broncos tailgates. We got Nuggets, Avs, takeovers going on too right now. Last Broncos tailgate of the season this upcoming weekend. Of course, the Broncos playing the Kansas City Chiefs with a chance to go to the playoffs on the line. But come out to the tailgate. We got you set up with drinks. We got you set up with food. They're going to do a live Broncos pregame show. You get to hang out with Todd, Sean, Jarrell, and all the guys there at the tailgate. It's just a great time, though. It really is the best tailgate in the city. We have a premier spot, kind of right off of Federal, right in front of sports fans. So go check us out. Hang out with us this weekend. I'm bummed I'm not in town because I'm going to miss it. But there will be more. And you never know. Maybe we get a special tailgate for the playoffs if things happen to go our way. But again, Nuggets and Avs takeovers going strong through their season as well. You can follow us on socials at DMVR_sports or just go to the events calendar at thedmvr.com/events.
We're going to flip over to some defensive guys to target, but real quick, any other receivers that you would like to see in Denver? I mean, Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State would obviously give Bo a nice 3-down option, a guy that you can target between the 20s, but also gives you the ability to stretch the field a little bit. Great route runner, sure hands. Where are you at with the receiving core? And out of these guys, is there anybody that jumps out?
Yeah, I mean, Egbuka is someone who, obviously Jeremiah Smith took over the game yesterday, but Egbuka had a few nice plays, including that touchdown kind of deep over the middle. Beautiful throw from Will Howard on that one, too. He's kind of everything. He's a really well-rounded player, and I think he would fit in nicely with this receiving core just because I think they need help. Isaiah Bond has really kind of fallen off lately. The speed is still there, and it's obvious, but he just hasn't been very impactful. I think he's been dealing with an injury too.
We already got Troy Franklin. You don't need another guy that just runs really fast in a straight line.
That's fair enough. Good point. I like this receiving class. Not exactly a lot of CFP guys to talk about right now, but
that's why I didn't focus on it too much. It's not really the star of the show when it comes to the draft process, but obviously Ohio State's got some guys. Tez Johnson makes a lot of sense given the history with Bo Nix, Sports Center. Game Day did a really cool feature on their relationship that was pretty touching. I would keep an eye out on all those guys.
One more though, Matthew. We'll see if he declares it. Matthew Golden he balled out yesterday against ASU. He was Texas's best wide receiver I think he had, I don't have it right now. It was 7 for 149 and one touchdown, including a 54-yarder. He really kind of took over that game. ASU just didn't have anyone who could cover him with that, size and blend of speed. I mean, 6 foot 195, another kind of just well-rounded wide receiver that I think would really complement everyone that they have now.
He's a guy who I kind of anticipated would come back just because he's good enough receiver to demand a nice little NIL paycheck and also could probably use a little bit more film. But I mean, if he has another game like he did in the playoff, who knows? I mean, we see it happen all the time. Guys ball out at the right time.
Yep.
Maybe he ends up declaring. I'd like to see him with the orange and blue for sure. I would love to see Abdul Carter or Jalen Walker with the Broncos. Either of those edge guys I think would be terrific. I know the Broncos have done a really good job of rushing the quarterback this year, so that's maybe leaning into more of a strength than necessarily filling a true need. But especially like if a guy like Jalen Carter's sitting there and you're picking in the early 20s with his versatility as an off-ball backer, also able to come downhill as an edge, I'm pretty intrigued there.
Yeah, Carter would be nice to get. I don't think we're going to be in range really for
I don't
the
either,
Broncos.
but you never know.
I'll go to the Ohio State game. I mean, just a couple guys that stood out to me. Cody Simon, the linebacker for Ohio State. I mean, he went and balled out. He's been having a great season, but led the team in tackles last
Dude was
night.
just everywhere, like really rangy. Seems to have a knack for the football.
Yep, 2 sacks, 3 TFLs. He was all over the place, and he's really rounding out, I think, a nice season too. 97 total tackles, 7 sacks, a forced fumble, 7 passes defensed, listed at 6'2", 235. So not really, the big, bulky, thumper linebackers that I think you're used to, talking about at this position, but maybe not the last, 10, 15 years or so. But he's someone we'll see. I mean, Denver doesn't invest in linebacker very much, especially
We
when
usually
it comes
go
to
the
the draft.
great value approach. So, we can get the Kroger one. It's all right.
Exactly. So that's about where I'll go with that one. Going to the Texas game, Dre's mentioned this guy, and he had the block on the field goal. But Ethan Burke, the massive defensive end edge for Texas, listed at 6'6", 260 pounds. This guy, Kirk Herbstreit said it on the broadcast. He doesn't get enough credit. He's out there really putting that length to use and is a good football player. I think he'll go a lot higher than a lot of people think. Jahdae Barron, too. I mean, the do-it-all kind of defensive back at Texas. I know that's probably the one, room on this team, on the Broncos, the secondary, that you feel pretty fine about. But Jahdae Barron can kind of play anywhere. You can put him at safety. You can put him at nickel if you wanted to. You can even put him at cornerback. So that's another guy who I'd keep an eye on.
What about Makuba?
Makuba, I mean, I think a little up and down, just in his career. Obviously left Clemson with the transfer. He had a nice game yesterday. He's turning in a nice season. I mean, 5 interceptions, 6 passes defense. He's getting his hands on the football finally. So an uptick in that production is always good. And he's an experienced player as a senior, listed at 6 foot 190. I like him.
I didn't very quietly 5 picks this year. He's a
Yeah.
guy when I was going through his numbers before we went on this, I was like, really?
Mm-hmm. Who else? You got anyone else right now?
I mean, we could throw out Ben Morrison from Notre Dame. Obviously, he's
Right.
not playing, but he might be in the Broncos range just given coming off of that injury. Don't know if corner is the biggest priority early on in the process, especially given what you've drafted the last couple of years, who you've been able to hit on. Safety would feel a little bit more pressing to me, and that's where I like the Texas kid you just mentioned, because I think you could put him at safety, you could put him in the slot, you could put him at corner out wide if needed. I will say that Riley Moss's injury situation has proved how pertinent it is, I guess, to have the depth there. I do think they could use another body. I just wonder if it's more can we find a guy early day 3 rather than prioritizing it early on in day 1 or day 2?
For sure. And I think if anything, George Payton has shown that he's comfortable taking guys in that area. And, like Riley Moss, he has shown, really good promise. McMillan's a guy who was undrafted. They're finding these guys all over the place. So I do kind of trust this staff and front office in terms of that department. You mentioned it. Notre Dame's got a ton of guys all over the field defensively. I mean, if you're looking at defensive prospects, tonight's game is the one to watch for. I mean, Georgia and Notre Dame, two of the best
Those B
defenses
lines, yeah.
in the country, and just guys all over the place.
What's your gut going into this Notre Dame Georgia game?
I just think that it's going to be too hard for Georgia with the backup quarterback. I do think Notre Dame wins a close one. I think it'll be a somewhat lower scoring game. So I'd expect not a lot of points, a lot of what we just talked about, big defensive plays. It's going to be a grinded out game, but I do think Notre Dame edges them out. What about you?
There's been an inevitability to Georgia that's been lingering in the back of my mind all season long. I know they've been high and low. I know they've had injuries. They're not the same Georgia that they've been.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like the Chiefs last year, where it's like we look up and then they win the national championship and everybody's sitting there scratching their head wondering how you let them win another one with this team. Like, how was this the team that managed to win it all? And that's just kind of where my gut is with Georgia right now. I think they're going to win the national championship. I don't think they're the best team. I don't think they've been the most consistent. I do think the athleticism that they have in the trenches on both sides gives them a huge advantage. And I just think that experience, they've got a lot of guys that have been here before. And I'm going to say that counts for something.
I mean, it's why they're in this position and why they're still, ranked this highly, even with what happened in the SEC title game with Carson Beck going out. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Before we get out of here, if you guys got any questions, comments, concerns, throw them our way in the Toyota chat. We'll get to as many as we can on these last couple minutes before we call it a day. A happy New Year to everybody out there listening in. We appreciate your guys' support so much. This is one of the more fun things that Jake and I get to do, and we appreciate you letting us lean into our nerdiness and then, really talk college football on a national level, focus on the NFL draft, all that fun stuff. It sounds like, I just said I think Georgia wins the national title. You have some skepticism based on the quarterback situation, which I think is more than fair. Like, if we look up and Notre Dame wins a 13-10 game, I don't think that's shocking by any means.
Right.
Who's the most dangerous at this stage, though? Is it Ohio State?
Oh, man, good question. I think you have to say Ohio State at this point, right? Unless,
From an eye test standpoint, at least, what they've shown.
Right, unless like Notre Dame comes out and puts 40 on Georgia and wins by like 20 tonight. I don't know how else. Just it's the offense for Ohio State, right? I mean, what Jeremiah Smith has been able to do as a true freshman, just in taking over games, and he's really become Will Howard's go-to guy. Right behind them, though, I think I'd pick Penn State, man. I think it's a really well-rounded team. I think Drew Allar is on the up and up, and just keeps getting better. They're not a perfect team by any sense of the word, but they can run the ball. They can get after the passer. They got a great defense, a great front, and a quarterback who I think you can trust from time to time.
Did the performance against ASU, how did that impact your opinion on Texas, if at all? Like, did that make you skeptical of their ability here, or is this kind of what you thought they were in the first place?
I guess I don't think I was really surprised. I was surprised, I think, in the fashion of how the game went down, particularly ASU's ability to fight back. I mean, being down 17-3 at halftime. I mean, really, it was 5 to 20 or something like that. Like, it was a weird score because they got that safety, and that's really what changed the game. But I've had my questions and reservations about Quinn Ewers for a while now. And I was just surprised that Sark didn't pull him, honestly, and go to Arch just to try and get a spark, especially late in the game after that pick.
It'll be very interesting if Texas has a slow start and Ohio State goes up like 10, 14-0. Yep. How do they handle that? Because we all know Arch is coming. I think at some point you've been a little hesitant to make the switch because Quinn was going to be the guy this year. But you're going all in for a title, so we'll see, man.
Yep.
All right, shout out to everybody that was rocking with us. We have so much love for all of you. Hope everybody has a very happy New Year. We'll be back each and every week with the Draft Pod. Dre will be back as usual here pretty soon. Jake's covering the Buffs. I'm covering the Rams. As always, thank you guys. Much love. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.